Hey all, great to catch up again, and thanks for joining our Monday Mindshare this week. And this is going to be a two-part series on make your day or break your day. And this is really following on from an article that we wrote in January this year. And it's been part of a probably 12 to 18 month product development journey. And part two, which we'll do next week, will be the launch of that product. And we're super excited and can't wait to share that with you. But we wanted to bring you through the journey of why we actually worked on developing such a product. And if you want to take a look and you get a chance at the article we wrote in January this year, was around the food industry creating products that for the beginning of the day not only had a bearing on what would happen when you actually have that meal at the start of the day, but also how it became quite a control point to how the body needed food, wanted food for the subsequent meals, lunch and dinner. And if you want to check out that article, there's this big QR code in the middle of the screen here. Hold your phone up to that, take a look at it. We'll make sure that we put the link down in the EDM and also out on YouTube so you can take a look at it also. But that will give you the background. Now, why don't we just start with talking a little bit about the drivers here of, when we say make your day or break your day, what are we really referring to? There's really three big drivers that we're concerned about. The pace of life and even modern concepts around fasting have, in a number of circles, promoted skipping breakfast full stop. And that is not the intention of the fasting community, that every day the normal would be to skip breakfasts. In fact, if you look at some of the research, what you'll find is that by skipping that breakfast, and if you look at the overall, in aggregate, glucose that's in the blood in the meals after breakfast, so lunch and dinner, you'll find that the blood sugars are in aggregate higher after lunch and even after dinner if you are to skip that breakfast meal. And clearly that's not a good thing. Heightened blood sugars, of course, not just as it relates to as a signal towards and a trend towards prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, but also for athletes looking to optimize fat oxidation. This is the last thing that we want to see happen. The second part here was really around a lot of these boxed cereals being very high in carbohydrate, high in sugar, and we'll show you some data around that in a second. But of course, the problem with this is not just everything we hear about the problems with sugar, but specifically with respect to how your body handles the rest of the day is quite measurable. And in fact, in high carbohydrate, high sugar breakfast, what you'll find is that typically the duration of satisfaction from that meal will be shorter for a high carbohydrate, high sugar meal, in that your return to having a hunger will be shorter. And secondly, when you reach for the next meal after the breakfast, it is measurable that that subsequent meal will be higher in calorie content, higher in energy, if you will. And of course, when we think about triggering this every day and it becomes a lifestyle, that can lead itself and contribute itself certainly to our body composition, ultimately obesity. The third point then is, if you look at the formulation of a lot of these cereals, is that they talk about grains. And the assumption is, well, it must be good because it's a whole grain. Well, in a lot of the cases, that grain, and you see this also in breads, but in the cereals, it's highly processed. And that processing of that grain, essentially it handles its way very similar to how a sugar is handled, both in the digestive system and when it gets into the blood supply, how the various hormonal responses with the brain respond to that very rapid rise in glucose. And in fact, it is absolutely measurable in terms of implications that's having on some of the neurotransmitters in the brain and creating behavioral responses to those fluctuating spikes and crashes in blood sugar. And we see neurotransmitters like dopamine and others having effects. And this is creating some of these craving reactions and behavioral reactions as a function of what we think we're doing the right thing by having grains, only to find out they've been highly processed, and that has a negative effect. So what to do? Well, firstly, it is really a big deal. It is not like this is just a dramatization of it's a corner case. It's a minor issue. This chart on the left here, and we circle in red a number of foods here at the top of this list. Those foods are very commonly what are had through the world as the morning breakfast. In the Asian parts of the world, more rice-based. And then if you look in the West, of course, the likes of cornflakes and Cheerios, these processed forms of grains. And then white breads, even wheat breads. You'll find all of these foods have extremely high glycemic indexes, which means their reaction, the way that the body responds to that food, you'll see quite a rapid high blood sugar increase. And as a function of that, of course, a rapid insulin response. You even see the likes of orange juice, commonly consumed, of course, in high amounts in the breakfast meal of the day, having that same high glycemic response. Well, not even in those kind of foods, but if you look at how we're driving habits of our children, and as children grow up into be teenagers and teenagers into adults, we look at some of the box cereal products that we put before them into a bowl. By weight, 50% of what you see in that bowl, in some cases over 50%, is just straight sugar. So it is a big deal. It is very real. And it's not like it's rocket science to resolve this. And as I said, this is not just about that single meal of the day, but how that creates the cycle through the whole day of our blood sugars coming up and down, and then our meal choices, food choices, our behaviors shift as a function of that. So we want to address that. And as I said, it's not that hard. To make your day, to how do we start the day right so that the rest of the day is a more balanced choice of foods? How is it that we can manage our behaviors in a way that our selection is not for an overabundance of foods, and we're selecting the right foods for the rest of the day based on what we do at the start? Well, the first point is let's do breakfast, right? Let's not skip it. Let's have it, but let's do it right. And we'll get to that in a second. And this may be even more so the case for athletes, that for a lot of athletes have the training sessions early in the morning, more the case. It's one thing about starting your training session without a lot of calorie. That's frankly quite normal. But after that session, when the metabolism is set up, it absolutely is ready to take in nutrition. And we should take a look at what type of nutrition to optimize both your recovery and just providing the caloric needs to support that exercise. The second point is shifting the mix. As we said, a high carbohydrate mix in a lot of these cereals is what's driving that shortening of your satisfaction and the requirement of you, because your hunger pangs are coming up, the requirement that you're reaching out sooner than you need to. Well, if we lower the carbohydrate and the sugar in that breakfast and we increase protein, fat, and fiber, the speed at which, firstly, that type of combined food comes through the digestive system is much slower. The response of the amount of sugar is just lower, firstly, in that type of food. And then the the absorption of the carbohydrate into the blood is a much more slower curve than this dramatic and rapid peak. And some of those fibers also will have a improved effect on how the body actually handles glucose in the system. And even the same can be said for some of the oils and fats. And then lastly, we want to avoid seeing any highly processed form of cereal. And it's fairly obvious when you look at the cereal. You know, they're pink and they're blue, or they're puffed all up, or they're flaked and flat. They're baked or fried with high heats and bad oils. All of this processing essentially, in a lot of cases, you'll see removes the fiber. In fact, the article that we talked about earlier with that QR code will give you the top 3 cereals in the US, and it will show you that those cereals have almost no fiber. They've been processed that much. So it's not only that they have a high carbohydrate amount, but their fiber amount is so low, and their fat has also been removed, and it's so low that glucose just comes straight into the blood extremely fast. If you want to take a look at the QR code here on the left side of the screen, that article there talks, it's actually a booklet that has a whole bunch of recipes on how to bring a granola together in the right way, or how to create a cereal. And we're going to talk a little bit about that now, but some of the recipes are in that life guide. You can download it and check it out. As I said, there is going to be a part 2 coming up next week, and we're going to make this super simple for you. We're going to give you a product that pulls all this together and makes it easy. Now, of course, there's many types of breakfast. Of course, there's eggs and bacon and avocado and wheat toast and things. And then there's pancakes. And again, all of those you can find in that life guide, how to do it right to set you up for a great morning breakfast. But I want to talk about the 3 classic cereal breakfasts that have been around since our grandparents have been around. And that is your classic muesli cereal, your granola, and then also your hot or oatmeal type or like cereal. And I want to give you some tips on how to make these cereals right so that your blood sugar response is minimized and that it's going to satisfy you for the longest. It's going to have you choosing the right foods in your lunch and dinner as it stabilizes your blood sugar in a much better way. So let's start with the cereal and the muesli. Firstly, the cereal and the muesli should be the minor part of the bowl. We see the way that the boxed cereal industry has worked those formulations is that it's built to pour it all out first and then put your milk on top. And it's the bulk of the mass of the breakfast is that refined grain. We're going to start and change that by firstly starting with the yogurt and starting with a little bit of the fruits. And we'll talk about fruits on the next slide, but it's only then after that we add on top of that, the muesli or the cereal. That's what's going to give you the crunch. It's what's going to give you the fats and the oils and the fiber. But start with the yogurt and a little bit of the fruit. And then let them mix and rest for a minute. So mix it all together and let it rest. And the reason for that and what we're trying to do with that is the fluid from the yogurt or the whole milk is going to combine with those fibers and the swelling will begin. And the reason why that's important is because the swelling of those fibers is the gelling that begins to occur. It's what's going to help to continue to gel and expand inside of the stomach. It's what's going to make you feel fuller, quick. It's what's going to give you that more satisfied feeling for longer. And it's also going to be that gelling compound. It's also what's going to have effect on how the body better handles blood sugars in the body. Second, for granola, well, firstly, the way granola is made, and it's in that QR code on that life guide. You can check it out there. Again, we're going to give you some really cool product next week to show you how to do this really easy. But a lot of the granolas are fried or baked at such high heat, and so bad choice of oils. Many of the oils are very heat sensitive, the vegetable oils. Staying with coconut oil, which has the highest smoking point, it can handle the high heats much better. Olive oil, fairly good also. But you start getting into those other oils that a lot of these granolas are baked and fried with because they're cheap. And you'll find that it ruins the nutrition that's inside of the granola, particularly the proteins. It'll affect if there is any carbohydrate in there, it'll affect that. And again, after you have your granola ready, starting with your yogurt, adding your fruit, and then your granola on the top, like this image shows in the center here, is the best way to do it. And again, mix it up, let it rest for a minute, and then start eating it. And that's what's going to give you the best effect. The third one is your hot cereal. Classically, it's been oats. And this is where you've also seen the refinement, processing of oats, where they roll it and they press it. And this has a detrimental effect on it. Again, if you take a granola type product or a cereal type product, and you can heat it in the milk first and simmer it, bring it to a simmer. If it's got quality fibers in there, you'll see the gelling beginning to happen, like you see when you have an oats. In the oats, it's the beta glucans, and the psyllium fiber. Similar gelling will happen. And you just want to warm it up to that point where the gelling and that starts to be seen and noticed. And at that point, it's when you want to take it off the heat and bring it into the bowl. And it's really also at that point that you want to be adding the fruits and the nuts after you've had the warming and the heating done to the cereal itself, to the material that you've used for the heating of the cereal. Again, in the Life Guide, check it out. There's a number of options there to choose from. But then after you've added your fruit or your nuts on top, your cinnamon, whatever it is you typically put on that, add your milk again, and then you can start eating it. You don't need to have the mix and rest because you've already done that in the heating process. The gelling has already started to occur. Let's talk for a second about fruits, because there's a wide variety of fruits. I'm going to talk about some classic fruits that are used for adding to cereals. It's used for the flavor and the texture, obviously. And as this slide shows, they're full of color. And that's the first signal or message I would give, is those pigments or the antioxidants or the anthocyanidins, as they are across all of these colored fruits. Those pigments and those antioxidants are actually quite heat sensitive. And we really want to avoid heating any of these. Where we can, we want to have them with the skins. Now, clearly, that's not the case with pineapple, not the case with a mango or a banana or a grapefruit. But many of these fruits, we want to have in its completeness. The skin has a lot of that fiber, has a lot of that pigment, and we absolutely want that in our diet. Across any of these fruits, what you choose, my guidance to keep this really simple and keep your proportion of sugars low, and at least what you understand about the range of sugar that you're going to be adding to a cereal, is keep it to a handful. So for berries, a handful of berries is somewhere probably around 2 to 5 grams of sugar. A handful of apple or cherries or grapefruit, it's going to be about 6 to 8 grams of sugar. And a handful of sliced banana or cubed mango or cubed pineapple is going to be about 9 to 12. So you can see different sugar amounts in these different types of fruits. And you'll see in the blue along the bottom here, then our guidance would be how you should use these relative to how much sugar is in these fruits is really simple. On a day when there's no physical activity or a very short aerobic training day for the athletes amongst us, keep it to the berries. If you've got a shorter but higher intensity training day, it might still be 60 minutes, 30 minutes, but it's of high intensity work. Apple, cherries, grapefruit are fine. And then for those of us who are doing longer sessions, 2 hours, 3, 4, 5 hour training sessions, choosing the likes of banana, mango, and pineapple during those days, really not a problem. But keep it to a handful and add that on top of your cereals that we talked about on the last slide. And all of these it's really, in terms of a fruit with a cereal choice, it's best to do after that physical exercise. In the middle of the day, you've done no exercise all day, to then tuck into a bunch of fruit, well, that can absolutely have an increased effect on your blood sugars. Mixing it with the cereals, with that fiber, that protein, and that fat, it's going to slow that all down. And ideally, having these after physical activity is the best bet. The body is much more set up to rapidly take that blood sugars down, or take the glucose out of the blood into the muscle cells after physical activity, than it is when we have done no physical activity. Well, hey, this is part 1 of the part 2 series of Break My Day or Make My Day. And I'm really looking forward to having a big announcement next week with S Fuels on part 2 of Make Your Day and Break Your Day. I hope you'll join us. Thanks very much for listening, and look forward to catch up soon. Thanks again.